Hi, good morning to everybody. We will just wait a few minutes in order to give the possibility to everyone to connect. Hi, so good morning again. Welcome to this webinar. We are very happy to be with you today. So we will start with a very quick introduction. I'm Gilardi. I'm the head of consulting in TVA RF Consulting. So I am handling the indirect tax and custom department. And today I'm here with Etienne Lair.
Hi everyone, thanks a lot for attending. I'm Etienne Lair. I'm a senior tax consultant at TVA, and I specialize in the tax matters, especially that regard the events industry. And so this is what we're going to talk about today in our webinar regarding the VAT matters that concern the event industry.
And Janae?
Hi, everybody. I am Janae Diocha. I'm the head of compliance for the VAT compliance division. I essentially manage everything relating to ongoing compliance. So to help with the practicalities of getting those VAT returns submitted and making sure that you get any refunds due for the events. So we will be chatting today together collectively on all of the important intricacies relating to this complex area of VAT.
Okay, so thank you, Etienne, and thank you, Janae. Just a very brief reminder who we are. So TVA RF Consulting, we are now part of VAT IT group since 1 year. So as you know, we are operating like a global partner in indirect taxation and customs. So we are handling both advisory, it is especially on my department, compliance matter and refund as well. So we are happy to support you in every matter related to indirect taxation that you can possibly have. And we develop brief expertise, especially in this event sector that we are talking about today. So we just brief and deep on the table of content and on the subject of today's webinar. So we will start with a general introduction on event. What is the background? Why is this the complex area? Then we will try to focus on some pick up on some checklists, on some triggering points, and particularly trying to explain to you why this event sector is so complicated and why we have to pay attention if the services that are included in your event are triggering VAT registration or not. We are trying to give you a practical feedback on interpretation of the different regulation on a European basis and on a national basis, and then a practical feedback of what the tax administration are giving us, like like interpretation and like feedback when we are submitting a reclaim, for example. Then we will focus and we will remind you the special rules for virtual and online events, which are so important after pandemic. And then we will try to give you a practical feedback in order to trigger all the risk and the challenges that companies are facing in this sector. Then we thought that it was useful because it is really a special and a trigger point. Remind you some basis and some background concerning TAMS. And then we will conclude with a global feedback, a global conclusion concerning the topic talked. So when we are talking about event sector, we are definitely talking of a gray area, okay? We are just repeating several times in one day working that TVA under taxation is just subject to interpretation, is a complex area in fiscal law, and I guess and we guess that this it's especially true when we are talking about events. Why? Because we have a frame, so a general European frame, which is applicable in European country, but definitely is not applicable in each country in the same way. And then close to us, near to this, you have an interpretation gave by the tax authority, which could be different from the rules, from the written rules. So today, our goal is to give you some methodology in order to understand which are the questions, what are the trigger points that you have keep in mind when you organize an event. And also, as I already taught, give you some practical frameworks and some highlights VAT trends across Europe. So, starting from the methodology. First point, when we are talking about events, we are talking about several actors. So it means that in an event, you can have exhibitor, you can have sponsor, you must have participants, you maybe will have an event organizer, event agency, etc., supplier, subcontractor, etc. And we will see the VAT treatment, the rules, the trigger points are not the same for each actor, okay? So the very first point when we are speaking about event is to ask to yourself, to your company, who I am in the event structure. And then for sure, we have to identify what type of event we are talking about. Is it a conference? Is it a sponsor event? Is it a team building? So basically, is it I am the organizer and finally I'm the final user of the event, or is it something else? When we are speaking about a conference, is it important to understand if there is a scientific content, because, for example, there are some exemptions, etc., etc. Third point, this is the most complicated, we know for you. What types of services are provided? So you have to be able to clearly identify all the services provided in the event, because we will see that based on type of services and based on the qualification of these services, like single services or packages services, the VAT treatment will be different. And also the consequence So VAT registration, not VAT registration, deduction, not deduction, will be very different. And finally, what type of customer? So at first, other customers, because based on the type of the event, maybe you are not selling to nobody. And if you are selling, so you are resell the services, is it, for example, B2C flow or B2B flow, etc., etc. So first cherry picking point of this webinar. Without a VAT, clear VAT structure of the event, it will be very difficult to identify the VAT treatment. And keep in mind, and we are seeing this from a practical point of view, if you are not able to explain clearly the structure of your event, the tax authority either will not clearly understand the structure of the event as well. Okay, so we know, and we will see after in the webinar, that this type of business is not so easily put in a clause. So I mean, you don't have agreements. Often the type of services is like mixed. So it's not so easy for you, for company, to clearly explain and to clearly prove to the tax authority in case of audit the structure of the event, the actor, etc., etc. But the first point that we want to underline is that if the structure is not clear for you, it will be not clear for the tax authority, and the consequence, it is a source of risk. So you will leave a lack of interpretation to the tax authority, which could not be in the sense that the company wants. So just to introduce the following topics and connect it to our talk about the methodology. The really first point to check when you are identifying your services, if to understand, based on the reality of the operation, what is agreed between parties. Okay, so if you cannot identify from a formal point of view your services, you have to look what is the real purpose of the event, of the business. Okay, then based on this, you will dispatch, and Janae and Etienne will speak about this. The type of services, and if a services will triggering a VAT registration or not. First one, admission right. Okay, when you have an event, you have 90% admission rights, and when you have admission rights, this is the first trigger for VAT registration. Then once you have identified this service, the type of services, you have to ask to yourself, based on the structure of the event, can we identify these services like single services, or can we identify as a package, so multiple supplies? Then we have to prove this structure with supporting documents. So I already mentioned it. The best one will be an agreement. So we know that based on the type of the business, you don't have often a clear agreement, but it will be worthwhile to have at least a card explaining and detailing all the services containing in the event. And I let Janae follow me up with all the consequences concerning the identification of the different services.
Great, thank you. So now we're going to get a little bit more involved within the substance. So we'll look at different services, different countries with different VAT outcomes, and this can all be true even within the same event. So if your business runs an event, the costs and the revenues that usually go through your books can attract VAT in several different countries all at the same time. So the country usually depends on the type of service and whether your customer is a business or a private consumer. Knowing which country's VAT applies is what decides these things. And there are three things that you actually do need to care about. So, do you have to register somewhere new? What rate do you need to charge? And can you get the VAT on the costs incurred? So, in terms of the first type of event related service we're going to look at is the sale of access to an event. So, what we basically mean by that is tickets to an event. So they are usually taxed in that country where the event physically happens. The country where your customer is does not essentially for this change anything. And it is the simplest rule in the event space, but it is usually the one that catches most organizers out because it almost always means registering in the country where the event is actually taking place. So tickets in the sense of an event can usually include entry fees, delegate passes, badges, day tickets, single workshop access, or anything that gives someone the right to walk in and actually participate as part of the event. It is usually important to emphasize that this rule relates to in-person attendance only. Virtual and hybrid events follow different rules, and Etienne will cover those later. So just as a note to why this is important, a business usually needs to register for VAT in the country where the event is held before they sell any tickets. So there's usually no shortcut for selling to foreign businesses, and the business must charge local VAT and then remit it to the authorities in the country where the event takes place. Okay, then I will hand over to Etienne to discuss some sponsoring activities, etc.
Right. Another type of service that you see a lot in the event industry is sponsorship, so sponsoring services. And these services, they basically consist in advertising essentially for the participants or the exhibitors in the scope of the event, typically B2B customers. And because these are considered to be advertising services, they are crucially subject to the main rule in B2B services, which means they are subject to taxation in the country of the customer. Which means that in the context of an event in a different country and with foreign B2B customers, typically the event organizer would not be charging any VAT on these services because they would apply the reverse charge. We have several different types of services as well as service packages. We're going to talk about that, which can classify as advertising services. One that we see a lot is the provision of exhibition stands, as well as all of the related services that serve that provision of the stand itself. So the building up of the stand, the provision of electricity, of an internet connection, etc. We're going to talk about a little bit more about this afterwards because this is an important category. You also have more obviously advertising services such as the inclusion in the sponsors list of the event or on the event website, the event catalog, etc., as well as types of advertising like banners or logos that are shown in the course of the event. The provision of stands specifically, it's an important category within events because it has its own VAT treatment that has been the subject of specific rules from the European Court of Justice, and which is applied in the member states as such, and which is specifically that when stands are provided to a customer, to an exhibitor within an event, if the stand is promotional, which means it allows the exhibitor to promote their activities, then it counts as an advertising service. Whereas maybe typically otherwise, the provision of exhibition space would be considered a service that is linked with the building where the event takes place. So it would be usually taxed in the country of the building of the event. But if it is considered to be advertising, essentially, so if it is a promotional exhibition stand, then on the contrary, we consider it to be an advertising service, which is taxable in the country of the B2B customer, which is why it's important at this stage to differentiate for event organizers what type of exhibition stand is provided. Is it a stand that actually allows the commercial promotion of the customer, or is it just an empty stand, essentially just exhibition space? Because both, they are subject to different rules. Another important category is service packages. Service packages, basically, they are combinations of services which are provided together. And the reason it's important to identify these packages is that they are subject to one and the same VAT rule, so one and the same country of taxation, instead of having individual rules of taxation that apply to each individual services. And we have specific types of packages that can be sold in the context of an event. Typically, they are linked to exhibition stands, so the category that we just talked about. So, for example, the positioning of the stand, more favorable positioning, the building up of the stand, dedicated internet, which is something I just talked about. You also have premium logo placement, the listing on the website, et cetera, et cetera. These are all types of services that when they are combined and when they're provided together with an exhibition stand, they will all be treated as one and the same service, even though in theory they consist in several different services. And crucially, when we are within that category, we apply the same rule as the one I just talked about for exhibition stands, which means that we apply the VAT of the customer's country, and which means most typically for foreign customers, we will apply the reverse charge, so we won't charge any VAT. Another important package is the one of the organization of the event itself. So there are types of organizers, of event organizers, that instead of organizing a public event per se, they take care of the organization of the event for another customer. So the principal, let's say, who's going to be the holder of the event, delegates the actual organization to a service provider. This type of services are usually considered to be a general service, because what the service consists in is not giving the access to the event, which is the first category that Janae just talked about, but instead it is ensuring the coordination and the organization of the event, which is a type of service that is subject to the general rule as well. What's important to understand is that we have this specific category of service. So usually we treat the event organization as a general service, but more increasingly in our practice, we have seen that tax administrations challenge that treatment, that conclusion, and more try to categorize an event as a sale of access to the event. So they will try to apply the VAT that applies in the country of the event instead of applying the general rule, which is something to be aware of, because if we are in the case of an event organization, an overall event organization, it's important to make that very clear so that we can avoid different characterization by tax administrations.
So we'll now have a look at the other services that are taxed where performed. So if you think about these services, these are the types of costs that will usually follow the event itself. So if you have a gala dinner in Madrid, Spanish VAT will apply. If your delegates stay in a hotel in Madrid, Spanish VAT will apply. If you book hotel transfers for your passengers from one location to another in Madrid, Spanish VAT will apply. So the pattern will remain consistent in this regard. So these services form part of a cluster of services that are physically tied to where the event is actually happening. So this will include your hotel rooms, your catering, and your passenger transport, which are all taxed in the country where they are delivered. In other words, in the same country where the event actually takes place. So for these types of services, it doesn't matter who is paying, who is attending, or where they are based. It's all dependent on where these services are performed, which again will be the same country as where this event is physically taking place. So if we think about catering, this can include your gala dinners, cocktails, food and beverages at the venue. These will be subject to local VAT, irrespective of who is actually consuming the food or drink. If we think about passenger transport, this will include airport transfers, transfers between the event locations, taxi chauffeurs, and again, local VAT will be charged on these invoices. Hotel accommodation will include your rooms for the delegates, rooms for teams, rooms for VIPs, and again, these will be subject to local VAT. So these three cost items are often the biggest part of an event budget. So every euro of VAT on these invoices is usually sitting in a foreign country. And if you can't reclaim it, you've usually quietly added a VAT rate varying between 17 to 27% to your event cost. So whether you can reclaim these costs usually depends on the supplier invoicing them correctly, and then you having the correct registration processes in place, but we will touch on these topics again later.
Okay, so just to summarize a little bit, so you see the importance to have to identify clearly the structure of the event and the type of services supplied, because it changes a lot. So once again, the important to have an agreement or a budget clearly identified in order to be able to explain exactly if it is a package services or if it is admission right, access, and whatever, in order to not have surprise when you are communicating with the tax authority concerning your event. Now I let the floor to Etienne in order to focus on the virtual and online events.
Right, thank you. There is indeed specific rules that apply for online events. So that includes events which are organized online, as well as live streamed events that actually take place in a physical space. The reason for this is that since 2025, the EU has imposed new rules for these types of services. So unlike the taxation at the place of the event, which usually applies, that we've just seen, for virtual events, there is a specific rule that now places the taxation in the country of the customer. And that's for all types of customer, whether they're B2B and B2C. So that can include a number of events, like I just said, and also webinars, by the way. So for example, webinars which are sold would also be subject to that rule, as well as conferences which take place physically somewhere, but which are also live streamed in parallel, and that live streaming is sold to customers. Specifically, regarding the place of the taxation, so like I said, it's taxed in the country of the customer. And that's whether the customer is B2B or B2C. So for B2B, it doesn't make much of a change because in all likeliness, you would apply the reverse charge anyway, which means there is no VAT charged on the invoices of the supplier, of the event organizer. However, for B2C, because you don't have a reverse charge in the case of B2C customers, it means that the organizer, the supplier, has to charge the VAT of the country of each B2C customer. So if you have, let's say, 20 B2C customers with 20 who are all residing in 20 different member states, you have to charge the local VAT of each of these countries. And also correspondingly register, in theory, in these countries in order to be able to collect the VAT and pay it to the local tax administration. Of course, that would be extremely complicated if we had to do this manually in each country. So there is also a simplification method which exists, which is the OSS portal, which is already a portal already exists for distance sales, and it also applies now to online events. It basically means that the organizer can register in this portal and centralize the VAT that is due in each of the member states where they become active. So instead of registering in every country where they have to charge VAT, they can just pay it via the portal, and then it is distributed among the member states itself without the event organizer having to register in each individual country. So like I said, for B2C customers, it's important to determine the country of taxation. So you have to trace the country of residence of the customers so that you know which VAT to apply. The problem is that currently, this is a relatively new rule, and currently in most member states, we don't really have any guidance on how to find out that country of residence, and more importantly, how to substantiate it, how to prove it, the country of residence, in order to prove that the method of invoicing was correct, for future reference. So there is no currently really any guidance in this regard across member states. If we take, however, inspiration from rules that already exist for digital services, so for digital services, suppliers have to collect at least 2 pieces of non-conflicting evidence, and that prove the location of the B2C customer. And among these, you have the billing address, for example, as well as the IP address, which are usually the strongest pieces of evidence. And the country of the bank account domiciliation, so the country from which the payment is made, for example, is another element that can be useful also. There is also the matter of the treatment of hybrid events. So this is a more specific subject. Hybrid events basically are events that are held both physically and virtually, so for which there is a physical as well as an online component. And the issue with these hybrid events is that, as it currently stands, because there is no unified EU approach to these events, they are treated differently among different member states. So, for example, in Germany, you have what you could call an equal distribution approach, where basically the German tax administration says the part that regards the physical access to the event, you tax it in the country of the event location. And anything that regards the virtual participation to the event, you tax that in the customer country, in the country of the customer. But you have countries which apply different rules, for example, the Netherlands and maybe also France. It's not currently really clarified so far, where basically they will look at the dominant element among the two, basically. So they would, you have to try to determine which is the more important element among the physical attendance on the one hand and the virtual attendance on the other. And depending on the decision, the conclusion that is reached, you have to tax all of the access, so both the physical and the online one, according to the more dominant one. So if we decide that the physical access is more important, then both the physical and the virtual access will be taxed in the country of the event, and vice versa, if we decide that the virtual element is more important than the physical. The reason it's very important to determine this in advance and to substantiate that analysis is that the determination of the correct VAT treatment, it's up to the organizer, it's up to the supplier, and which means it's their responsibility. And if it is later challenged by the administration because it was not sufficiently researched and sufficiently proven, it can lead to problems, because it means that then the organizer will have potentially charged the wrong VAT, at least according to the national administration. And the issue there in this regard is that so far we only have very little guidance. The countries that have issued actual guidance regarding this matter are very few. I think so far there's only Germany and the Netherlands. So we can expect that there will be more guidance issued in the future, hopefully.
So once again, an issue of methodology, issue of structure, to determine the structure of the event, issue of lack of harmonization on a EU basis, and some new type of event who are developing after the pandemic, which are a little bit complicated to treat at the moment, as already can say it, because there are some missing guidance and moreover some discrepancies of interpretation between European countries. So let's focus now on the risk and challenges which your company are facing when you are organizing an event. So I let Jenny start.
Perfect. Thank you. So we'll first have a look at the purchases side. So essentially, what's really important here is that if the supplier charges the wrong VAT on your invoice, it won't be possible for you as a business to get it back. It doesn't matter if the VAT has been paid, even if it's been printed clearly, and if everybody acted in good faith in the transaction that happened, the tax authority usually does not care and they simply will just reject the input tax claim. So the EU usually has a system or does have a system that lets you recover the VAT that you have paid to another country. But this recovery mechanism will only work if the supplier has correctly charged VAT in the first place. So if the supplier initially got the rule wrong and charged VAT that they shouldn't have, then the tax authority will simply refuse your reclaim and the cost will stay with you as a business. So why should a business care about this? So most suppliers will usually default to charging their own local VAT. Sometimes this is correct and sometimes this can be wrong. And you can't necessarily always, as a business professional, just tell from the invoice itself. If the supplier has incorrectly charged VAT, you may also only find out months later after your claim has been rejected. And by that time, it's often very challenging to go back to the supplier to obtain a credit note to get the VAT back that way. Some of the suppliers might not be inclined to cooperate, or some may have moved on, and some will even try to charge you for the rework that they need to do to get this right. So the VAT on a single big event on your purchaser side can often run to into six big figures, which is real money and not a rounding issue. And it's quite, there's a lot at stake. So it's very important to make sure that this is done right. Just as a short summary of how this recovery mechanism works, for an EU business that is established in an EU country where you've incurred VAT in another country, there's essentially an EU-wide refund procedure where you can file electronically to get your input VAT incurred back. The deadline is quite tight for this. It is usually within 9 months of the end of the calendar year. If your business is established outside the EU, there is a separate refund procedure. This refund procedure is paper-based and it will depend on whether the EU country you are claiming from has a reciprocal arrangement with your home country. So some countries do refund non-EU claimants, some don't, and some are quite restrictive in this regard. So now that we've looked at the purchaser side in terms of risks and challenges, we'll move on to the sales side of things. So in essence, getting the VAT wrong on what you are buying is painful, but getting it wrong on what you're selling is even worse. What I mean by this is you will actually end up paying the cost twice. So once to the tax authority along with penalties, and then once to your customer when you have to go back to them 6 months later to ask them to essentially pay additional VAT due. So there are usually 3 questions that we need to consider on every sales invoice. So we need to understand where exactly that specific service is taxed, whether you as a business has a registration in that country, and what specific rates of VAT applies to that transaction. So if we think about some risks and consequences, we need to ask the question of what can happen if we do get this wrong. So there are 2 layers of consequences and both of them can bite. The first one is an administrative category. So this is usually where the tax authority may come after you for any of the underdeclared VAT, as well as penalties and interest. So this can obviously become quite a costly exercise, and it may often only surface during an audit, which can sometimes be many years after the event has occurred, and you may have long gone as a business, moved on with it with your activities and trade. And then from a commercial perspective, you also need to think about the fact that you may need to go back to your customer for the additional VAT if you should have charged VAT in the first place. They may not be able to recover it if too much time has passed, in which case that additional VAT burden will become a real cost to them. So even if they can recover it, it may also have some reputational issues, and the relationship between you and your customer may be tarnished. So then, just as another note, so why is this important? So this could be the scenario that you don't want to end up in, where you will be required to send an apologetic email to a major customer 6 months after the event saying that we got the VAT treatment wrong and please pay us an additional, for example, 60,000 euros. If your customer can no longer reclaim this VAT because this deadline has passed, then you would have effectively made them eat all the cost. So obviously, if you are in the event sector, repeat clients are the bedrock of your business. And this conversation is the kind of thing that could end repeat business. So in terms of those risks, it's really important to try mitigate them as far as we can. And then I will let Matilda take over from here to discuss the rest.
Thank you, Janae. And what other risk and challenge linked to what explained Janae is if you wrong identify at the first place the type of services you maybe did not identify, you did not understand that these services were taxable in the country where the event takes place, so that you have obligation to be VAT registered in this country. Okay, so we tried to explain, to remind the major category of the services which could be included in an event structure, and we saw that sometimes they are triggering VAT registration. When these services are triggering VAT registration, this one is not an option, is an obligation. Okay, we put this slide because we have often this question. Okay, I know that maybe I have taxable operation in the country, but as I'm not claiming back my purchase VAT, maybe the tax administration will not discover it, etc., etc. Okay, maybe from a practical point of view, this could be true. But please note and be underline this, that once you identify a services like, for example, access, admission, right, included in your event structure, and then you have taxable operation, and then you have to VAT register in the country where the event takes place, this is definitely not an option. Then we can argue, and we can maybe agree that from a practical point of view, you have so many more chances to be discovered by the tax authority if you are submitting a claim, because we know that for the event sector, the audit, the information requests following the submission of a claim are practically systematically. Okay, so the tax authority will ask you details concerning the event. They are often asked to provide the agreement, the budget, and the explanation of all the services purchased and resales. And this is the trigger point, because for sure, if you have a VAT registration, the problem will be the sales invoice. Another point, so we mentioned it several times during this webinar, but just to remind and repeat, we have a discrepancy. We have different level of legal framework concerning the event sector. So we have the European rules, then we have these rules who are applied in the countries, and unfortunately, in the event sector, we have different national rules. So even if maybe you know and you have knowledge from a European point of view of the legal rules to be applied, please pay attention that they could be not received in each country in the same way. Okay, so we put here some example concerning the packages services notion, because we had some rejection lately this year. So we noticed that not the package service definition notion is not applicable at the same time, at the same way in each European country. And then it's linked to the other point. Even if you have a global and consistent and general legal framework, you may have different practical interpretation given by the tax authority. So there is 3 degrees of difficulties. First one, know the general and European legal framework. Then check how each country is applying this this European general framework. And then at the third stage, check how the tax authority are, from a practical point of view, interpreting these rules. Then, no, it's always me, I think. So another example, so we just put this, we know that you already know, but just a remind, when we identify that there are taxable operations in a country, okay, so we have done the first step, territoriality, and then we have to identify who is liable to remit tax, okay? Who is liable to remit VAT. And then once again, you will have discrepancies between each European country because you are applying or not local reverse charge mechanism, which is unfortunately at this stage not harmonized in Europe. So another point of difficulty for the company is once you identify the territoriality, you have to understand if you are liable to remit tax or not. So these were the major risks and major challenges that you are facing when you are organizing an event. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, we think that it's important to focus a little bit on terms, which is a very, very particular sector with very particular scheme on the event sector. And I will let Etienne explain and talk about this.
Yeah, so the tour operation margin scheme, so TOMS for short, it is a very important scheme to know because it can apply to event organizers, sometimes in a rather surprising manner, especially because its application is automatic. So in the context of event organization, it's an important special scheme to be aware of. Essentially, what it applies to is the buying and reselling of specific services that we call travel services. And basically, they consist in services such as accommodation or transport of people, as well as specific trips or excursions, etc. And what's important to understand is that this applies to services, even individual services, such as the buying and reselling of hotel accommodation or the simple buying and reselling of passenger transport, even when there isn't an encompassing travel that is associated with these services. Why that's important for event organizers is that, well, in the context of events, we often see these types of services. So there is often a hotel accommodation for participants, or there is a service of transport from, for example, the event venue to the airport and vice versa for the participants, etc., which are sold by event organizers. And that means that event organizers can be concerned by this scheme, even when they're not necessarily aware of it, and even in cases when they don't organize travels otherwise or aren't travel agencies. So it's important to understand that this is something that can apply to any type of operator, any type of event organizer that buys and resells these services, even when there isn't a travel that is being sold. Why it's important is that the consequences of the terms of the margin scheme are very specific. So aside from the fact that you have to charge VAT on the margin exclusively and not on the whole price, unlike what's usually done, the far more important consequence is that all of the related expenses become non-deductible, which means that for the event organizer, the accommodation expenses, the passenger transport expenses, the taxi expenses, etc., the VAT that is charged on these expenses will not be recoverable because the margin scheme applies. So that's something to be very aware of. And another problem that's related to this margin scheme is that, of course, it's applied differently across several member states. So we see a difference in how the local tax administrations apply this margin scheme. Sometimes they apply it, sometimes they don't. And specifically, for example, in Spain, in theory, the TOMS is optional, which means the margin scheme, it only applies if the event organizer chooses to apply it, in theory. But in practice, what we've seen in the context of VAT reclaims is that the national administration has refused to refund the VAT that was associated with these expenses because they considered that TOMS was applying to these expenses, so that the margin scheme applied to the expenses, even though in theory it's optional, so it should not have been applied. In another example is the Netherlands. You can tell we have quite a lot of issues with the Netherlands currently because it's the third time it's mentioned. And specifically what we've seen recently in the context of the Netherlands is that they applied, let's say, they invoked the services that usually pertain to the margin scheme in order to affirm that a certain number of services that were provided by the event organizer should have been taxed in the Netherlands instead of being taxed without VAT. So basically, they used the margin scheme not necessarily to refuse the VAT refund, the VAT deduction, but instead to attract the taxation, the Dutch taxation, to these services. So another example is France. France has a very strict approach regarding the margin scheme, but it's not necessarily surprising because this is in line with the guidance of the European Court of Justice. So it's in line with the position of the Court of Justice of the European Union. And that line is that France applies the margin scheme as soon as there is even just one type of services that fall within this group, which is being sold by the event organizer. So earlier, I talked about the types of services that can fall within the margin scheme. So for example, hotel accommodation or passenger transport. In France, as soon as an event organizer sells even just one type of these services, so just an event, for example, with hotel accommodation, then France will apply the margin scheme to the hotel accommodation. So even just one type of service is enough, instead of having maybe a combination of services that could be interpreted as a travel service. Instead, as soon as you have one type of service, then the margin scheme is applied in France. But again, it's not necessarily a surprise because this is in line with what the European Union or the Court of Justice of the European Union applies itself. So this is a rather strict way of applying the margin scheme that event operators have to be aware of, because it can very easily apply to at least some of their services in the context of event organization. So what solutions are there for event organizers? There are several workarounds, you could say, in order to avoid this margin scheme, which is usually not advantageous because, like I said, it prevents the VAT refund, so it prevents the recuperation of VAT on the expenses. So first of all, obviously, is the need to identify the services that could be affected depending on the country in which the event is going to take place. And aside from the obvious thing, which is simply to not sell these services, you have several types of economic arrangements that can allow you to avoid the margin scheme. So, for example, because the margin scheme, it applies to buyer-reseller arrangements, so where you buy a hotel accommodation, for example, and then resell it as such to the event participant. If you avoid this type of arrangement, you can hopefully avoid the application of the margin scheme as well. One way that we could do that, one example is, you can see it in the illustration, is that instead of buying and reselling the hotel accommodation, make it so that the hotel sells the accommodation directly to the participants, and then eventually, potentially, the event organizer can charge a commission of intermediation to the hotel. So for having redirected the participants, the customers, to the hotel where they bought the accommodation. So this is a way that you can avoid this margin scheme, because you're not in a situation of buying and reselling, the margin scheme doesn't apply, but you are still in a position to provide a hotel accommodation in the context of your event. And other possibilities are to split. We have a few customers, clients among our event organizers who simply operate a split. So they have two entities, one entity who is in charge of the event organization and another entity who is in charge of everything that concerns margin scheme supply. So everything that regards the hotel accommodation or the passenger transport. And what this allows for is that the first entity, the one that is in charge of the event organization, will not be affected by the margin scheme, because all of the services that relate to the margin scheme are taken care of by the other entity. So, of course, it's a more complicated setup because it requires having two different legal entities working together. But that is a pragmatic solution that we see sometimes in the industry. And finally, what you could call a more pragmatic solution, of course, is that if you have travel-related expenses, of which we think that they could fall within the margin scheme, sometimes from a strategic perspective, it makes sense simply to not include them in the VAT reclaim requests. Why? Because tax administration, when they receive a request for VAT reclaim, they look at all of the types of expenses. So including these types of expenses, it attracts the attention of the administration to the fact that the margin scheme may apply, with the consequences accordingly that we've just talked about. So sometimes when there is these types of expenses, it just makes more sense to accept them as final costs, so to speak, and not to include them in the VAT reclaim for strategic reasons, essentially to avoid attracting the attention of the administration on these types of supplies.
Thank you, Etienne. So just two words to conclude, because we are running out of time. We saw this event sector is particularly a complex area, gray area, a lot of rules, different level, European rules, country rules, tax administration are given increasingly strict interpretation of this rule. Then we have some new type of event which has not definite at this stage from a fiscal point of view. So you see a lot of challenges for you, a lot of risk as well. So our message today to conclude the webinar is anticipate, try to anticipate. We are here to support you. We can support you in order to map in your event services, anticipate all the challenges, the risk, maybe the VAT registration if needed, etc., or to securize your reclaim request, to support you in case of information request sent by the tax authority. So don't hesitate to contact us, and we are here to support you on this topic as well. Thank you very much to attend this webinar. Thank you, Etienne. Thank you, Janae. And I think that's all for today. We will share with you the replay on the LinkedIn page and the slide as well. So thank you very much to everybody. Have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.